Here's the psychological truth that will change how you see every relationship in your life. And by the end of this, you'll understand why the people closest to you suddenly turned against you. Carl Jung discovered something profound about human nature that explains why your growth threatens others. He said that most people will do anything to avoid confronting their own shadow, the parts of themselves they refuse to acknowledge. And when you start healing, when you start growing, you become a living mirror that forces everyone around you to see exactly what they're avoiding. But here's what Jung observed that will shock you about why people really hate your transformation. According to Carl Jung, the moment you stop playing the role others assigned you, you trigger what he called projection. They start projecting their own unhealed wounds, their own stagnation, their own fear of change directly onto you. You're not being hated for who you've become. You're being hated for who they've refused to become. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people aren't ready for that level of self-awareness. So instead of looking inward, they attack outward. They attack you. And here's the part that will make everything click about your relationships. Carl Jung discovered that every person carries a shadow self, the collection of traits, emotions, and aspects of personality that they've rejected or denied. When you start setting boundaries, when you stop people-pleasing, when you refuse to shrink yourself, you're essentially integrating your shadow. You're becoming whole. But for people who are still running from their shadow, your wholeness becomes unbearable to witness. Jung observed that we despise in others what we haven't accepted in ourselves. Your confidence reminds them of their insecurity. Your boundaries remind them of their inability to say no. Your peace reminds them of their internal chaos. But wait until you hear what Jung said about why your family and closest friends are often the first to turn against you. According to Carl Jung, there's a psychological process called individuation. The journey of becoming who you truly are, separate from the expectations and projections of others. Jung said this process is essential for psychological health, but it's also deeply threatening to the people around you. Why? Because your individuation forces them to confront their own lack of authentic self. When you stop being who they needed you to be and start being who you actually are, it shatters the illusion they built their identity around. They don't hate the real you. They hate that the real you exists at all because it proves they've been living a lie. Here's where Jung's most revolutionary discovery explains why entire groups turn against you. Carl Jung said that we're all connected through what he called the collective unconscious, shared patterns of behavior and belief systems that keep societies functioning. But these same systems depend on conformity, on people staying in their assigned roles, on maintaining the status quo. When you break free from these collective patterns, when you refuse to participate in generational trauma, when you stop enabling dysfunctional family dynamics, you're not just changing yourself, you're threatening the entire system. Jung observed that the collective unconscious will mobilize to bring the deviant back in line. That's why it feels like everyone turned against you at once. But here's what Jung discovered about why people say, "You've changed," like it's a crime. According to Carl Jung, we all wear masks. He called them personas, to navigate social situations. But most people mistake their persona for their true self. They become so identified with the mask that they forget there's a real person underneath. When you outgrow your persona, when you stop performing the character others expected, it feels like death to them. Not your death, the death of their projection. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. They're not ready for that terror, so they blame you for triggering it. And here's Jung's insight that will explain why your growth makes people so uncomfortable. Carl Jung discovered that we all have both masculine and feminine psychological traits, what he called the anima and animus. But society often forces us to suppress one side. When you start integrating both aspects of your psyche, when you become both compassionate and strong, both nurturing and assertive, it threatens people who are still splitting these qualities. Your wholeness makes their fragmentation obvious. Jung observed that people will attack the very qualities in you that they've forbidden in themselves. But wait until you understand what Jung called the transcendent function and why it makes you dangerous. According to Carl Jung, psychological growth happens through the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces in tension until a new level of consciousness emerges. When you can be both loving and boundaried, both empathetic and detached, both open and selective, you've accessed something most people can't comprehend. This transcendent consciousness is exactly what threatens others. You're no longer predictable, because you're no longer operating from unconscious patterns. You've transcended the either-or thinking that keeps most people trapped, and that level of psychological freedom is terrifying to those still caught in binary thinking. Here's what Carl Jung said that will change how you see every person who turned against you. Jung observed that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he also warned that this privilege comes with a price: the loss of everyone who was only attached to your false self. The people who hate you now, they're not responding to who you've become, they're responding to who they've refused to become. Your healing journey is forcing them to confront their own psychological stagnation, and instead of using that as motivation to grow, they're using it as justification to attack. According to Carl Jung, individuation, becoming your authentic self, is not just a personal journey. It's a spiritual and psychological imperative, and the hatred you're experiencing, it's not evidence that you're on the wrong path. It's confirmation that you're on the only path that matters, the path back to yourself. Jung said, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. You've torn down those barriers, you've integrated your shadow, you've transcended their projections, and that, according to the greatest psychologist who ever lived, is exactly why they can't stand you anymore. The question isn't why they hate you. The question is, are you strong enough to keep growing despite their hatred? Because according to Carl Jung, your psychological evolution depends on it." Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it.